this conversation is squarely about how these systems are happening inside of us. And I'm sharing that to say, I do this work because I want liberation collectively for all people. And I center people whose identities and lived experience are the most undervalued, most underestimated, those of us who are left most under-resourced because of these systems. So this is Black folks, this is non-white folks, this is folks whose first language is not English, who were not born in the US but are living in the US, folks who have a lower socioeconomic status, queer and trans folks, non-binary folks, houseless folks, incarcerated folks. This is who's in the center for me in terms of why we must do this work. I also hold that the solution that we're seeking will not be realized in our lifetime. And so as I do this work, I am committed to it and it is important. And also the non-attachment part of my practice says that I don't have a story about how exactly you should engage this work. Only you know that. I'm just here to facilitate the space for you to do the investigation and to start. This is just like a starting place, right? We're just like peeling back a few layers. And in the end, this will be the work that each of us has to do for the rest of our lives on a daily and sometimes moment by moment basis. Okay? Fantastic. I want to meet you in the space and I want to be mindful of time. So it's going to be a quick intro, right? I want to know your name. I want to know your pronouns. I want to know where you are physically located. And then I would like to know if there was an element of nature. It could be like fire, water, earth, but it could be like mushrooms or leaves or a particular flower or a certain animal. If you were one of those things, what would it be? Right? So I'll model. My name is Kelly Nicole Palmer. My pronouns are she and her. I am physically located on Lenape land in this current moment outside of New York City and Jersey City. And if I could be any element today, I think I would be a waterfall. That rushing, I like the sound, and that feels how my breath sounds today because I have a little bit of allergies going on. So I'm the waterfall. Anyone else can take over, okay?
All right, I'm Snehan. I live at the Integral Yoga Institute in San Francisco. He, him, his, water has always been the element for me.
Great to see you again, Snehan. Thank you for sharing. Next.
Hi. It's so good to see you, Kelly. Sarani, she, her. I'm on Ohlone land in Berkeley, now called Berkeley, California. And I would choose a flower, probably echinacea. Healing. Yeah.
It's in my cup. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you for sharing.
Hi, Kelly. I'm Marie Prashanti. I live also in Ohlone land, but over in San Francisco in Noe Valley. I go by pronouns of she, her, and hers. And I choose a butterfly because of the continual life, that transformation, this continued transformation we have with life. Thank you for being here, Kelly.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that and for that visual.
Hi, good morning, Kelly and everyone. Sangha, good to see everyone. My name is Mukti Devi, born and raised in San Francisco, she, her, hers. And ever since I was a kid, I used to always say, I'd love to be a bird one day, just to see and feel the liberation. Thank you. Thank
you so much, Mukti Devi. And I'll bring y'all's attention to the chat. Mishala says the computer they are using doesn't have a speaker or camera. They live at the IYI Institute in San Francisco. Pronouns she, her. And if they could choose, if she could choose, she'd be cellulose. She said, I'd love to be a plant's wall, cell walls. That's pretty cool. Thank you, Mishala.
Hi, my name is Keiko. Oh, sorry.
Go Keiko. Go.
Good to see everyone. Thanks, Kelly, to be here working with us. I pronounce she and her. I live in San Francisco, originally from Japan. So I'm one of the many transparent, transplants people. if I were to be some nature element, I think I would be wind or breeze at the time. Partially because I'm just getting over my cold, but also the air is getting chilly, and I feel like I like to have a little bit of a warm breeze around me. So thank you.
Thank you, Keiko. Nice to meet you.
My name is Eric Gustafson. I live on Olonian land in San Francisco, and he, him, and I use we a lot for myself. Not quite sure where all that comes from psychologically, but I'll let you guys figure that out. I identify also with wind for different reasons. Unseen, but heard and powerful.
Thank you, Eric. Nice to meet you.
Hi,
Hey, everybody.
Oh, sorry.
It looks like two people were talking.
Do you want to go ahead? Candy?
Sure,
Okay.
thank you.
You can go after.
Hey, everybody. I'm Candy Reddick, pronouns she, her. And I'm still orienting to this place. So I'm now in Pennsylvania, brand new, coming up this way from the south. And the element I identify with is water, but I'm really missing a childhood favorite snack treat, mangoes. So I'll probably be a mango tree.
Thank you. Where in Pennsylvania are you, Candy? Just from my own curiosity.
Near Harrisburg.
Okay. Okay. My family, we drive a lot from Jersey City to North Carolina, and sometimes we come through Pennsylvania, so I'm familiar. But thank you. It's good to meet you and be in space with you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm Saraswati and my pronouns are she, her. I am originally from Canada and I live in the Mission in San Francisco. And I have a nice close relationship with hummingbirds, so I would pick hummingbird.
It's nice to meet you. Thank you for that visual too.
I'll speak
Hi, I'll
up.
go next.
Go ahead, David.
Sorry, David Califf, go by he, him, live north of the Golden Gate Bridge in Marin County, grew up in San Francisco, so I'm definitely the fog guy. I grew up in the midst of all the different permutations and wonderfulnesses that fog can bring. So we have a family running joke about the fog and how it behaves and who it talks to and all kinds of stuff. And I'm gonna, I appreciate the request to be on camera, but as my spouse says, David, you're not quite ready for the Mr. DeMille close up. So I'm gonna put myself on off the camera. I'm facing a pretty serious health challenge that requires me to step in and step out. So rather than being a distraction, I'm just gonna leave it on camera, but I'll be here. Thanks very much.
Thank you, David. It's nice to meet you. And I'll say to you and everyone in this space, take care of yourselves in the way that you need to. Thank you. It's nice to meet you.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming, David. I'll share next. I'm Ramananda. I'm also on Ohlone land in San Francisco. My pronouns are he, him, is. I'm definitely will not be identified with fog. I'll take the sun. Or, yeah, I'll take the sun. That seems pretty good. I like the light, the warmth, and the energy of the sun. So I'll go with that. And I'm happy to be here.
Thank you, Ramananda. I love the sun also. Thanks for being in this space.
Can I go next? Hi, my name is Ausra de Verge. I am, my pronouns are she, her. I am originally from Lithuania. I am in San Francisco and I love trees. They're just, I feel comforted by the trees. Thank you.
Nice to meet you, Ashra. Thank you for sharing.
Hello, my name is Raisa and I live in San Francisco, a couple of blocks from Integral Yoga Institute. And my pronouns are she, her, but I come from Finland, and in Finnish culture and language, there's no pronouns, personal pronouns at all. So I feel sometimes mixing. I go for he, she, them, they, what, it. It's all the same. So I always end up apologizing of that, mixing the pronouns. And I always identify with ocean. But at the moment, I have a lot of fire in me, so as well.
Thank you. It's nice to meet you. And thank you for telling us that about Finnish culture. I did not know that. So I appreciate it.
I can go. Hi, I'm Claudia. I'm also in San Francisco. She, her. And for me, it is also trees, always trees.
It's nice to meet you, Claudia. Thank you.
Nice meeting you.
So I'm calling in from Ramananda's computer, but this is Abhaya. I live at the Integral Yoga Institute. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I would like to be a rose today, a pink rose.
Thank you. It's nice to meet you, Abhaya.
Hi, I'm Marilyn, and I'm originally from Baltimore, Maryland, but I now live on coastal Miwok land, just north of San Francisco in Marin County. My pronouns are she and her, and really grateful to be here today. And I think if I could be anything today, I would be a great blue heron. I get to see a lot of great blue herons here and just love them for their beauty and stillness and just their ability to watch. So thank you.
Thank you for that, Marilyn. Nice to meet you.
Hi, I'm Rashmi. I was also born and raised in San Francisco. I would say my pronouns are she and her, but I would say all. Identify with everything, so I love everything and everybody. And the element I'd identify with is earth. And if I could be a flower, I would be the lotus flower because I love how it grows from mud and it just emerges out from the water. So it just takes a lot of strength.
Thank you. It's nice to meet you, Rashmi.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Susan Ford. I grew up in Boston, but have been in San Francisco for many years. She, her, and the thing that comes to me today, which comes very often, is turtle. I identify a lot with turtle, and I've just been in a very slow part of my life, and it seems like I'm very happy to be here and just move slowly through all that we're going to do. So.
Thank you. It's nice to meet you, Susan. I think that is everyone except for maybe Gary.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, definitely.
My name is Gary Kasaya, and I live in Los Gatos, California. Pronouns are he, him, his. I suppose I would identify with bamboo because it's very tall and graceful and grows quickly, and it bends in high winds because it's flexible and it doesn't break. But happy to be here, and I certainly appreciate your teachings.
Thank you so much for being here, Gary. Thank you all for leaning in and introducing yourselves. I was a hairstylist for 15 years, so you can't know it, but you telling me a nature item helps me remember your name. It's like a trick I had as a hairstylist. I didn't use that, but I had a question to ask all my hairstylists, all my clients, and then I can remember their names. Even now, it's been 15. I was a hairstylist for 15 years, and it's been 5 years since I retired. And still, if I bump into a client, I'm like, Cam. And they're like, how do you remember my name? I have a trick. So now I can remember y'all's names also. Thank y'all for leaning in. I want to take a moment to touch back to one of the documents that I sent to you all for the pre-reading, which was our community aspirations. You don't need to pull it up at this time, but I want to read to you how I would like for us to aspire to be in this space. And then I want to make space in case there's any things that you would like to name. I have this list because I've been doing this for a little while, and this usually lends to us having a space where everyone can show up bravely. Sometimes when we have conversations about race, people will say like, we got to make a safe space. And the reality is we do not have the power to make the world safe. We live in a very unsafe place. And I don't like to create the false illusion that comfort of people is going to be more important than a real conversation. So we're not creating a safe space where you won't be uncomfortable. You will likely be uncomfortable most of the time that we're together. And it could be disorienting even the time that we're not together. What I want to remind you is that you have a practice that is set to root and ground you and help you be with discomfort. And so I want to remind you to like depend on that practice. But I want to offer these other things too. So the first thing that I want to offer is that we aspire to listen deeply, honoring when people are sharing, being present and engaged, and recognizing that there are spaces where we disagree. It's actually an invitation to listen more deeply and be curious. The second is to learn deeply by letting go of perfectionism, which is asking you all to go deep, releasing any tendencies toward perfectionism, and being okay with the fact that this conversation will be messy, nuanced, and will not be tied up in the neat, tidy bow at the end. We're going to talk later about some of the principles or like socialization that is a part of systems of oppression, and perfectionism is one of them. The story that for you to be valuable in the space, you can't mess up. And I want to say that that's not true in this space. You're valuable in this space because you exist. And you saying or doing something that others don't agree with, you saying or doing something that you need to be called in around or supported about doesn't devalue you in the space. Your value can only increase you. So I would say like lean in and let go of saying like, well, am I saying this the right way? Just say what you need to say and we'll take care of you if you don't say it the right way. Meaning like, we're going to support you. Which brings me to number 3, creating a brave space. This is us pushing further than what is our comfort level. And in my experience, folks who are white, live closer to whiteness, sometimes don't have to experience discomfort when we're talking about race, meaning the conversation never comes up or there's an easy way to end that conversation. In this space, that won't necessarily be true. And I'm just asking you to stay in that discomfort, knowing that it will not end you. In fact, it is for your own spiritual and emotional growth, okay? The fourth is for us to support one another. And this is really just an invitation for us to try to be respectful and supportive of each other in our sharing and creating a nurturing space. And this means knowing when we are going to step in and step back. Meaning some of us might share a lot and always have something to add. And I'm going to make the invitation that sometimes you should sit back and let those who don't share as much have the space. And at the same time, if you're a person who normally plays close to the chest, doesn't really share openly, I'm making an invitation for you to lean in and do so. All of our perspectives are important in this space. And it's likely if you're holding a question or a perspective, someone else in this room is too. And it's better for you to just put it out there so we can all talk about it together. The next one is for us to hold each other accountable. And holding each other accountable means being open to the fact that we're not all going to agree. And a lot of us are carrying socialization that upholds systems of oppression. So holding each other accountable doesn't have to look like, hey, Ramananda, you said the wrong thing, but it can look like, I love and care for you so much, and I know you're capable of great love and expansion, and I want to invite you to reconsider, think this out, be more curious, pause, be quiet, whatever the thing is that we need them to do, right? And we can do that in a loving and kind way. The next one is for us to bring down walls and show up authentically in a space where you have people of mixed identities. The burden of having to share about the impact of systems of oppression often falls on people with underrepresented identities. So the Black folks in the room, the non-white folks in the room, the queer folks in the room. And I want to say that we are all experiencing systems of oppression. So in this space, I don't hold the space for people to prove that systems are happening. We're going to talk about them, but I want to invite people who sit closer to power to be authentic in this conversation, to actually be in a thinking and feeling space, not just a space of trying to uphold perhaps a story about not participating in systems. I'm telling you right now, you're all participating. I am too. The work that we're doing is to figure out how, why, and what we can do about it. And we're going to be doing that for the rest of our lives. The next thing that I want to invite is for us to being open to being challenged and changed. I am going to share things that might be different than what you believe are holding. I may have already done that. I want to invite you to just sit with it. We have these 3-hour times together, and I'll be providing you resources along the way. But we also have community dialogue times. And what I would say is, let some of what we talk about land in you. And if it's still something that you don't understand or really agitates you, our community time is a time for me to facilitate those conversations. What I don't want to happen is for people to get in arguments with me about the definitions of like words like racism. We're going to use the definition that I'm holding as the facilitator. We can talk about that word and I can answer questions around it. And also, I didn't just pull these definitions from nowhere. These are like working definitions that people across activism spaces and in equity work and liberation work are using. And so that's why I'm offering them to you. And then the last one is to let radical love of ourselves and others be a guide in this space, meaning, like I said in the beginning, as far as I know, everyone here is a human. And as a human, we are messy, complicated, and problematic, but we can also be wonderful and great and loving. And I just want to invite you to hold that even if someone does something that is really harmful, I will take care of that. I will call them in around it and have like radical love and compassion for yourself and let it extend outward, meaning that the people in this space don't lose value to you because maybe they say something that feels uncomfortable to you or they do something problematic. We can be in a space of saying, this is a human who obviously needs more support to learn. That's what I have to say. This is a human that needs more support to learn how to be in this world in a more equitable way. Okay. Are there others that feel important to you all that we would want to name out loud? Are there any questions also about what I shared?
I have a question, Kelly. Are we holding to confidentiality within this space?
Yeah, so what I like to say is that the work we're doing here, it is very important, it is essential that you discuss it with the people that you are in community with outside of this space. And there is a way to do that. And I call it telling your own story. So an example might be on Saturday, I went to a training around race and equity with my community. And in that training, I learned X, Y, and Z, or I felt this, and this, or it brought up for me this, and this. What is not okay to say is I was in a training on Saturday and Kelly said, or this person said, or that person said. These are different things to me. And so I don't want you to not talk about what's happening in here. In most ways, it's been my experience that people can't be actually present for this and not have it float into the rest of their lives and have to be discussing it with other people. But also there's a way to do that. And it is through telling your own story, sharing your experience, sharing what you are learning, sharing realizations you had, sharing readings that resonated with you. Because the reality is, one, I'm not doing this work anymore. So I'm asking you to continue the work. And two, there are people who love, trust, and believe you that I will never have access to. This might be your family. It might be people that you're a caregiver for. It might be your neighbor. And as I said in the beginning, for this work to be sustainable, for us to be taking the steps in this generation, for perhaps if humans are still on the earth, us to see real equity in 10 or 15 generations, it's going to be essential that you're in rapid and regular conversation about race with the people around you. And hopefully this time can give you tools to do that. Okay. Perfect. Thank you for your question too, Sarani. Are there other questions or thoughts about what we would want to practice in this?
Okay, as this meeting is being recorded, when we break off and start sharing these, what you're asking us to do, that's not included there, right?
No, we won't be recording your personal things. When we have our larger conversations, we will. So you would want to think about what you feel comfortable being recorded. I have to think about it all the time because I'm constantly being recorded. But I would just say, like, well, what I say for myself is I don't share about past my own comfort level. And I am good to ask for the recording to be stopped if I need it to be. So that is available to you also. Thank you for naming it. Is there anything else that feels important? Okay, let's dig into the first part of our work, which is talking about self-study. This is a part of my practice. I don't want to make the assumption that it's a part of each of your practices, but I would love to hear from anyone who'd want to share, what does self-study mean to you in your life?
Hi, Kelly. I'm sorry. Could you repeat that question again?
Yeah, I just want to know what self-study means to y'all, what it means or looks like in your own life. Yep. And there's no right or wrong answer.
I'll speak up. Self-study to me looks like a willingness to sincerely look at my thoughts and behaviors and reflect on them. Are they in harmony with my values? Ask myself those kind of questions. And I think it can be challenging to do because we tend to be so kind of anyway, I think there are challenges inherent in doing it because it's difficult to step back from our own perspective and story and look openly at it. But that's the intention. That's the way I understand it.
Thank you for sharing that, Ramananda. I would add to what you're saying that what initially brought me to yoga was self-study for the exact reason that you said. It felt like I never had enough time to step back and think about who I was and how I was in the world. And in a 75-minute class, I felt like I had access to that thing. And my teacher put philosophy and self-study ahead of asana in my private lessons. And so self-study has been the grounding part of my practice that like feels the most important. So like people will say to me like, you practice every day? And I'm like, yeah, moment by moment. I'm like, Kelly, what is the story you're telling yourself in this moment? Which is a question I'm going to put in the chat to offer to you all, because like I said, I don't make an assumption about people's self-study practice, but in the space of disrupting systems, this is the most important question you can be asking yourself in moment to moment. And I'll bring you back to it all the time. But what we can know is that systems of oppression rob all of us of our ability to imagine beyond what has been set as normal, right, best, and good. Right? And so it can be hard to disrupt a thing that you aren't even analyzing. So like an example I might give to you all is, I am a lesbian and I am out in this moment, but I was not for the entirety of most of my life. only in the last 5 years since my family and community know that about me. And I like movies, but I hate romantic comedies. Like, I don't like to watch them at all. I'm giving y'all like a really basic example. I don't like them. But then I came out and I went on a fast of straight media, which is hard to do because straight media is everywhere. But I stopped watching things that center straight people because I've been doing that my whole life and also pretending to be one. So I'm just not going to watch it. And do you know what I found? I love queer romantic comedies. They are my favorite. I watched all kinds. I watched period ones, current ones, YouTube ones that somebody shot with their phone. I simply love it. But the story that I was telling myself was that I hated this kind of movie. And it wasn't that I hated it, it's that it was just another subconscious reminder that who I actually knew myself to be wasn't right, good, or acceptable. So I gave y'all that base example, and we'll talk about like some more like real examples, but this is the work of disrupting, of like asking like, why am I spending my money in this way? Why do I watch the things that I watch? Why do I listen to the things that I listen to? Why do I live where I live? Why do I call this my community versus that? Why do I feel called to help these people, but not these people? These are the stories. And for me, self-study in terms of racial equity work is super important and always ignored. It's always like about like, how do I say the right thing, or do the right thing, or change my Facebook profile to the right thing, or post the right article. And that's not sustainable. That's why it doesn't ever really shift or change. But we live in a society that doesn't want you to examine these things. So it is going to be very difficult. There's going to be a pushback between the self-study and awareness that you're building around racial equity and the society that we still have to navigate. It's going to feel like you don't have time, there's too much, you're just one person. And I'm calling everyone, inviting everyone to know, like, this really is the way that we heal a thing, is for people to really dig up every story inside themselves, examine it, and then put back together how you'd like to be in the world with other people. So self-study can look like a lot of things. During our time today, it's really going to look like a lot of writing. I'm a writer. And so this is one of the ways that I get my thoughts out. That might not resonate with you. What I will say is there's a lot of different ways to explore the questions I'm going to put forward. During this time, I'm going to ask you to write, but other folks I've worked with have put those into recordings that they listen to when they're out doing walks, when they're gardening. They record themselves answering these questions for themselves. Don't limit yourself in how you do this exploration. It's just today it's offered in a particular way. Okay. Are there other questions or thoughts about self-study that you would want to bring forward before we get into our first exercise?
I can add a couple of things. I agree with Ramananda, it's incredibly difficult to do because so much of it is unconscious. I think for me, self-study has always been trying to understand that who I am is a process and nothing static. Like often we find identities and have that ongoing, this is who I am, and to just see myself as a process as I'm moving forward and as I'm getting exposed to new ideas, new inspirations. For me personally, it has been a lot about trauma work and understanding how past influences presence, and to understand that because of that, who I think I am is not necessarily the truth. And so moving increasingly more towards authenticity, which I think that's why I got really involved into yoga. It was that internal feeling that I became more familiar with. How does it feel when I'm really authentic? And I think I know by now, I know the feeling when that is so. And I know the feeling when it's not. Sometimes not knowing exactly what's really happening. Sometimes I can't name it, but I'm having deeper access to the way it feels to be authentic.
Thank you for sharing that, Claudia. It reminds me actually of a video I just watched, Gabor Mate, which y'all might have or probably have heard of them before. but they did this interview on Democracy Now! And they were talking about how trauma is why we have systems of oppression. It was really powerful. So I just put it there. It's about 45 minutes, the link, I put it in the chat. Thank you for naming that. I think that leads perfectly into our next conversation, which is around discomfort. For me, to embody what Claudia is talking about, to like hold that I'm in a process, means that I have to choose repeatedly to face discomfort, to look at the things that I don't really want to look at about myself. And for me, that has also been the work of healing a trauma story, that I'm not enough. So if there's anything I find that I don't like about myself or that is not in alignment with my true values, this also devalues me. And so I can tell myself that that story is not true and really lean into my own discomfort as a tool for one, building my capacity for discomfort, but two, as a tool to decide which way this process of me is going, to decide how this process of me will unfold and how this process of me will impact everything else around me. And so I want to offer y'all a writing exercise. We'll do this again in another time, but we're going to write in cycles. And I only want you to finish a sentence. And so you'll need a piece of paper and you're going to complete the sentence: when I feel discomfort, ... There's no right or wrong way to answer it. But for this first cycle, I want you to stream of consciousness write for 7 minutes about what happens, what it is when I feel discomfort. I'm keeping the time. It's the 53rd minute where we are. So when we get to the top of the hour, we'll pause. Okay? Just write to finish that sentence. You can wrap up your thoughts there, put your pen down on your tool, your writing tool. And I want to invite you to just like take your hands off of it and take a cleansing breath. So a full inhale in and so the next part of this exercise is an invitation to read back to yourself what you wrote and circle what feels most important about what you wrote. Okay, and I'll give you a few minutes to do that. And then we're going to work with what you circled, okay? Does everyone have something circled or do folks need a few more minutes? So the invitation is that for the next 5 minutes, you're only going to write in depth about what you circled. Okay, so it's 2:01 and at 2:06, we'll pause, but I want you to take what you circled and write in depth and as much depth continuously for the next 5 minutes. We'll actually go to the 7th minute. I'm keeping it. You have about 2 more minutes there. All right, you can wrap up your thoughts there and put your pen down. Again, hands off your paper or your writing space when you're done. Deep cleansing breath for yourself. And again, you're going to read what you wrote in this second iteration, circle what feels most important, and then we'll wrap up by writing about that for 3 minutes. So reread what you wrote to yourself, circle what feels like, oh, this is the heart of what I wrote, and let me know when you're ready. Does everyone have what you'd like to write about? What did you get your circle piece? It's the 10th minute of this hour, and I'm gonna make the space for you right until the 13th minute. So go ahead and write as deeply as you can about this last thing that you circled. You have about 30 seconds there. All right, you can put your pens down, take a deep breath in and sigh it out. So this particular kind of cycle writing is a practice I have. I didn't make it up. I learned it from someone else. I like it though, because when I'm trying to investigate a story for myself, about myself, it gives me multiple chances to like get out what's in my mind, focus on something in particular, write more about it, and cycle through in that way. Sometimes when I'm trying to figure out a thing, I might write for an hour in cycles of 10 and 5 and 3 and 1 and back up to the top again. So I offer that as a tool to you. I really offered it to you because nobody knows what you do when you're uncomfortable with you. And as we dig into a conversation and weeks of conversation and lives of work that are uncomfortable, I want all of us to have a clear picture of what happens when we feel discomfort so that we can empower ourselves to choose how we're going to show up, how we're going to let that discomfort impact or inform the work that we want to do. And so, again, I don't want you to share about what you specifically wrote, but I do want to open up in this large space to talk about tools that you might have that we might all be able to use when discomfort arises. And I'll model for you. I find that when I am uncomfortable, I hold my breath. So when I catch myself holding my breath, I do a 4-part inhale, 4-part hold, 4-part exhale. And I do it until I feel capable of just returning to my normal breath. This also helps me from being defensive when someone is telling me that something I've done or said has caused harm to them, and I didn't intend to do that. It happens all the time. I'm partnered, I'm raising people, I'm in a family, I'm in chosen community. You're going to interact with other people, and that means you're going to do things that don't resonate with people, make them feel undervalued, hurt their feelings. And there's the practice of knowing what's yours to hold and what's not. But in those times when a person is coming and saying like, you disappointed me, you hurt me, for me, I used to have a pattern of being like, well, but that's not what I meant, and that's not what I said, and that's not, you shouldn't have taken it that way. And that does not build connection with people. It actually damages people's ability to trust you with their feelings. And so instead, I breathe and listen and apologize. So that's an example of a tool that we could use when discomfort comes. You might have your own breath practices, alternate nostril, 3-part breath, any of these things, but the breath is an amazing tool. I'll open up in case you all have things.
Kelly, in a similar way, I just like to feel my feet. That sort of, because I tend to disembody. I kind of get out here to get out of the situation. So if I can feel my feet, feel the ground or wherever I'm sitting on, and just get back into the body, that really helps me.
Yeah, thank you for that, Erica. I have a similar thing I say to the people that I'm parenting. I tell them to find their seat. Meaning like, even if they're standing, connect to the surface that's supporting you. And I say to them, like, what's happening right now? This lecture you're about to get, this discipline that's about to be handed out is not going to end you. We don't use like physical violence or anything in our house. So it's like me having a hard conversation with you and holding you accountable for your behavior at age 8 or 6 could feel very disorienting. And you might want to escape. So focus for a moment on what the surface that's supporting you. That's not going anywhere. I'm not going anywhere. This discipline's not going anywhere. So no, thank you for naming that in the space of finding your feet or seat. Are there other tools that folks would want to share?
I'll share. I think just having the ability to really step back from whatever's causing discomfort. Instead of initially having that reaction of anger or combative or being combative or trying to prove yourself or something that made you feel uncomfortable. I think just taking a moment just to step back from the situation and analyzing it before getting wrapped up in it. And then also with the breath, because as we know how powerful the breath is just to kind of regulate and bring you back, because a certain situation, if someone says something to you or did something to you, it could mess you up. And so I think just being able to step back, take a break from what was done, what occurred, and just focus on your breath and to yourself at that moment. And then you can analyze and see how to move forward to make amends or just giving yourself that space at that moment.
Thank you for naming that, Debbie. I often think about that as like a sacred pause. Like sometimes people don't even know I'm in a sacred pause. I'm just like, for myself, I'm like, okay, I'm in a sacred pause and just be quiet for a second and let all the things land in me before I react. For me, it's the difference between being reactive or responsive. And I prefer to be responsive. And so, yeah, giving yourself that space. Something else that you said made me think about another tool that I want to name is curiosity. There's a book, it's called Emergent Strategy, and it's by this Black queer activist named Adrienne Marie Brown. I'll add it to a resource list for y'all. But they have a podcast, and on the podcast, one of the episodes was about forgiveness, essentially. This person was talking about having a tumultuous relationship with their parent and that parent dying before it was resolved, and them doing ancestral work to forgive and heal from that relationship. And something that they said during the interview was that curiosity is the biggest tool in healing relationships, because we're often coming with our perspective and the other person has their perspective, and we aren't curious about why they hold that perspective. We just know it's different than ours and we want them to have the same perspective as us. And so when discomfort arises for me, I have to turn on a curious space, because if not, then I'm super consumed with trying to get my point across. And it's like, if a person you care about or not comes to you and says that you aren't showing up as the most authentic, caring, compassionate version of yourself, it's going to be curious about how that impacted another person, about what that person means, about ways that you could restore the trust that this has. Curious about like all the things. And so, in that pausing space, for me, it's a great way to like activate that curiosity, because I found that now that I am in a practice of curiosity with other people, my personal life and in like working spaces, connection is much deeper than if we were just not being curious, not asking questions of ourselves and others. So thank you for that. Marie Prashanti, I saw you had your hand up. Did you want to share?
Yeah, I have a question. My question is, I really love this circular writing, by the way. It was like a huge light went open for me, and I appreciate that. But one of the things is that I had actually written down, like, what are some of the tools? And I think for me, my question is a little bit that I don't think I have a lot of tools. And I want to ask one thing. I get the idea of stepping back and observing your breath in that moment that you start to feel discomfort. But one of the things I wrote down about myself is that I often get, with the discomfort holds, I get frightened and I retreat. I just really retreat. And my question was, what are the tools to lean in? And I hear curiosity is maybe one of the tools to stay leaning in. But for me, when I feel discomfort, I also feel afraid. If the discomfort holds, I feel afraid, and it's really hard for me to lean in. So then I back away and I break relationships, I end working assignments, the list just goes on. I would like to know if anyone has tools for how to lean in when you're feeling frightened or afraid. And I have that in my mind, it was completely blank. I didn't know what tools I could even say. So mine is opening up to the group. If there's any thoughts.
It looks like Snehan has something.
Unless you want to go directly, Kelly, and address that yourself.
No,
but
I'll add a few.
Okay, cool, thanks. Oh, Prashanti, thank you. Yeah, what I was going to say, and it'll address this issue, is that when I feel uncomfortable, and I'm reflective on it, I notice I tense up. And then that's the first thing, is I tense up, and depending on the degree of pain, if it's really, really the deeper pain, then I avoid it, I resist it. I immediately look for ways that can alleviate that pain. If I isolate myself or take some action, in other words. And often that'll be what's habitually brought me some kind of relief or pleasure or joy in the past. Typical things that, I know can bring me some momentary pleasure, I might go do that. It depends on the degree of pain, and if it's super painful, then I'm stuck there. So yeah, how do I lean into it from there? If it's not that painful, what is more frequent for me is that I do lean into the discomfort, and I'll often try to address it right away. I found it really, I don't know, maybe I'm rajasic enough to be quick and try to facilitate or move along the processes before other people's timeline. I know that's been brought to my attention, but I'm ready to address whatever discomfort is being brought to me or I'm bringing to somebody else right away. It's, for me, so much more beneficial than going away and writing a story about it and then trying to come back and do it in some kind of a more equanimous state of mind. But I know that works for more people. What I do when I'm very uncomfortable in order to lean into it is, besides just taking a break, and you do have these tools, Prashanti and others, we know, Kelly said curiosity to move into it. That's good, is to kind of, where am I safe? Am I safe, or do I really feel? Because if you're really feeling endangered and unsafe, you have to find a way to be safe again. And that may mean isolating yourself and taking yourself, moving away from it, and then coming back when you feel safe again. As soon as I feel safe enough to address it, then to lean into it, I may do some spiritual practice to ready myself to lean into it, like japa or pranayama, or even more extensive meditation, and then continue to move into it with intention, finding myself back into the heart instead of, this is also what happens is I try to intellectualize it, understand it, get it, and then figure it out what the remedy is up here. So that's where the sadhana takes me back down into a more of a heart space, and that readies me to lean into it in that way that Kelly's been promoting, whereas we're all wanting to unveil that kindness, those lofty spiritual values that we all uphold. And that's where I find that they reside in me. If I can move back into the heart through chanting, works so very well for me, and others, then I can lean into it and come to somebody from that space instead of, are you ready to figure this out with me now? Because I'm ready to figure this out with you now, which usually meets with resistance. That's all I have to say. Om Shanti.
Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it, and I appreciate your question. So I want to answer this in a couple of ways. The first, and we're about to get into like white supremacy culture and whiteness. Whiteness and white culture does not make space for people to be whole And part of that wholeness and dissecting of wholeness is feeling feelings that are labeled as bad. Or if sometimes like in yoga spaces, they'll be labeled as like lower emotions or low frequency emotions. I don't agree with that perspective. There are no lower emotions. A whole human feels a vast array of sensations and experiences in life. So part of what is keeping us from being with discomfort is that we've all been socialized to seek comfort constantly. And those of us who sit closer to a perceived axis of power, to whiteness, maleness, straightness, cisness, social and economic power, are most used to their comfort never being questioned or disrupted, right? This is where like there's scholars who talk about like white fragility. I don't actually believe that's a thing, but this is where this notion comes from, that like, how can you make me feel uncomfortable as a person? That's not part of my identity. Because of my identity as X, Y, or Z, I'm guaranteed comfort. And now you are making that unquestionable for me. And I don't know what to do with that. I don't have the skills or tools for that. And so this conversation about discomfort is really an opportunity first for you all to be able to name what happens inside you when you have discomfort, because you're going to feel discomfort. Think about your entire life. So much of just your existence as a human is uncomfortable. The growing pains of getting teeth. I had a 6-year-old that thought their mouth was exploding. They were getting their 6-year-old molar. It was just a tooth growing in, but it was very painful for them for several days. It had me in a panic of like, I gotta get them into the dentist only to go in and then they take a picture and say a new tooth came in. That is why they're uncomfortable. So like discomfort is part of our life. And so could we look at discomfort as mistakes that we make, as information about the process that we're in and where that process is going? And so the number one tool that I want to offer around discomfort is you telling yourself, reminding yourself, this feels hard because I'm learning. That's what I have to tell myself all the time. I just had to do that around parenting. There's a situation, it's very uncomfortable for me. I'm not really sure what to do. I still don't know what to do. And it feels hard because I'm learning. I've never had to navigate this before. I've never had to think about this before. I've never had to deal with this before. It's not a sign of my failing. It's not a sign of my weakness or inadequacy, but that's what comes up when we feel uncomfortable. It's like, ugh. In a few minutes, when we start talking about white privilege, some of you might be like, oh, this is really uncomfortable. Remind yourself that first, it's temporary. And second, it feels hard because it's a new conversation. This is a new thing to look at. And eventually it won't feel new. It might feel uncomfortable, but it won't be something that you can't do. And like the parallel I make for people is that first time someone called Trikonasana to you. And it was awkward and it was weird and you didn't really know what to do. And it might've been uncomfortable for your shoulder or your psoas or your foot or whatever. And right now, when I say Trikonasana, you can imagine yourself in that posture. And it might not always feel the same in your body. It might be less comfortable, but you're familiar with it. So it doesn't scare you in the same way. And that's the same thing that has to happen with discomfort around racial equity or any other system of oppression. You just got to keep having the conversation. And after being able to tell yourself that this feels hard because I'm learning, you need to find a safe space to name, hey, Snehan, this is me, Marie Prashanti. I'm reading through the things that Kelly sent and I feel so uncomfortable. It's making me question everything I ever thought about myself and my goodness. And I just need to name that for a friend. And then Snehan might say to you, you know what? I'm glad you called me because I was feeling exactly the same way. And it helps me to be in this discomfort to know I'm not the only person that's navigating it. So it's like, remind yourself that this is part of your process, right? To feel uncomfortable. And then remind yourself by naming it out loud. And if there's not someone to name it, to name it for yourself in a circular writing, in a stream of consciousness, in a recorded voice audio that you make for yourself. And if you are a person who is like audio helps you, I'll tell you right now, I have several recordings in my phone of me telling myself things that I don't need to hear at times when I might not have the capacity to like create it in my own mind. So I just got to build the capacity to go in my voice notes and click on it and listen to it. And yeah, I definitely have one that says, this feels hard because you're learning. I have another that says like, this feels hard, but this is for you. You can't even imagine the type of liberation that's going to be on the other side of this work. And for me at this point, that kind of like brings me back to be able to just be present to what's happening. But there's also this part of like whiteness and white culture that puts us in a binary of like, oh, I'm feeling this great discomfort, so I can't also experience great joy or peace. And that's not actually true. All of these things are always present in you at all times. So you're just cycling through what it means to be a whole person. And I mean, I have to tell myself that every time I watch TV for more than 45 minutes. I'm like, I feel sad about the entire world. I don't know what to do. I want to just take my family and go run into the woods and never come back. That's not actually a solution that is sustainable at this particular time. So like, this feels hard because I'm learning about the long ongoing ramifications of humans on this earth. It's not going to end me though. It's data that I can use to shift and change, give me new resources to study and learn. Like, but again, this is a long practice of being with discomfort. I think I sent it to you all, but if I did not, I'll also send you a meditation that I have that it's a guided meditation around being with discomfort. I recorded it maybe in like 2020, but it's free and available for y'all to look at right on my YouTube page. So I'll send the link in with the like reminders from this time. Are there other, oh, one more thing I wanted to say too is that part of white culture is like, everything has to take a certain amount of time. And what I want to invite y'all to think about, and we'll talk more about it in our ongoing time together, is time is made up and you as a human have a finite amount of time here, quote unquote, supposedly. The question is not like, how much can I get done, but what is the quality in which I can live? And like, how do I live into this discomfort and make it a part of being normal? Because culture tells us that it's not normal. Culture tells you that you shouldn't even make other people feel uncomfortable. And it's not true. You can't actually make another person's discomfort come up when you're talking about truth and goodness, but you can offer like a supportive way for that conversation to happen, which is what y'all are experiencing here. And however you might feel when we're on session, just imagine that that discomfort is going to rise and fall for you throughout the days, as long as we're doing this work and way beyond the time, because there are going to be things that we talk about, things that I ask you to consider that aren't going to be tangible for you until you are like at the grocery store or watching a movie or viewing the news or talking to someone on the street. And then it's going to be like, oh, this is what Kelly was saying to me in the class. And an immense amount of shame, an immense amount of guilt, regret, all kinds of things could rise. And it's in that moment that you have to say to yourself, okay, this feels hard because I'm learning in real time right now, but it's not going to end me. I'm grateful actually for this discomfort and this lesson coming to me in this moment. And that takes time to build. So you don't got to be a rush around it. You just got to stay in it of saying like, okay, I don't have the capacity to be with lots of discomfort, but I could do it for 10 minutes and I'm going to set a timer. And for those 10 minutes, I'm not going to try to run from how I feel or distract myself or make up a story about why it's not real. I'm just going to like be in it. That's why Kelly can watch a comedy movie and also be crying sometimes, because I just watched the news. Two things. I'm not watching the comedy to escape, but I like to watch it and I still have feelings and I'm just going to like be in them. I'm not going to do anything about them. I'm just going to feel them. And the good thing that we can all celebrate is we are deeply in a practice that gives us all the tools to feel all our feelings through breath, movement, meditation, self-study, right? Like there's tons of groups that I support with this work, and mindfulness is not a part of it. And so I have to like pull mindfulness in little bits, but you all have your own practice. So lean on it. Because really this work of racial equity is about self-equity too. The same system that we're about to talk about oppresses all of us. It just shows up in different ways. And for some people, it means there's no room to actually exist. For others, it means you don't get to be your whole self. For all of us, it has to end though. It's not sustainable. And so that's another reminder of like, I am doing this. I am going to have this hard conversation with my family at Thanksgiving or whatever family gatherings because it's necessary. And I'm going to lead in that way of saying, I'm going to talk to y'all about this because we are not free and we need to be free. We deserve to be free. We can't unless we talk about how this system of oppression shows up here in our family in this dynamic. Okay. I want to get a break because when we come back, we're going to build some common understandings with language, and we're going to start our conversations around privilege and white supremacy culture, and those conversations can be heavy. So it is a 10-minute break. We're going to start from the 40th minute. So we'll come back at the 50 minute, but get yourself water. Now's a great time to step out and get some fresh air. I'm going to do that. I'm going to walk downstairs from my apartment and step outside. Get yourself food if you need to. I don't have feelings about people eating and drinking during our time together. So take care of yourselves in the necessary ways. Maybe you want to go get a hug from people you care about, pet your cat, pet your dog, look at your fish, talk to your bird, do those things. And then we'll be back at the 50 minute, okay? Thank you.
Kelly, we can't hear you. We can't hear you.
And
Yeah.
uh-oh, can y'all hear me? Yes.
Now,
Okay.
say a little more. It was, it's no, not now. It's, you don't look like you're muted, but we can't hear you.
I'm not. Give me 1 second to figure out what.
Oh, that's better. Yeah, now it's coming back.
Okay, you can hear me now.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I don't know how much you heard. So what we're about to do next is build common language. There are going to be phrases and terms that I use today and throughout our time together that you might have your own ideas about. And I'm not here to change your ideas about that. But when we're in this space, I want you to know exactly what I'm talking about when I say something. And so I want to share some definitions. In part of the pre-reading that was shared with you was a list of words. You don't need to pull it out. There's really 3 words that I want to focus on today. And I'm going to read the definitions to you. But before I do that, I want to give you all a chance to share in the chat or unmute to say what comes up for you when I say these words, so we can all kind of like hear what might be in the room around these words before we hear the definition. Does that make sense? Great. So the first word that I want to talk about, it's really 2 words, phrase, is whiteness and white culture. So when I say that, whiteness, white culture, you could share in the chat or you could unmute. What comes up for you?
I would say the dominant culture, at least as relates to the USA.
Patriarchal, oppressive.
Thank y'all for naming those things. Are there other things that come up when you hear whiteness or white culture?
Duality, separation, separateness.
Entitlement and the norm.
Thank you for that. I'm going to read the definition to you all around whiteness and white culture. Whiteness and white culture is the way that white people and their customs, culture, and beliefs operate as a standard by which all other groups are compared. Whiteness is also at the core of understanding race in America. Whiteness and the normalization of white racial identity throughout America's history have created a culture where non-white persons are seen as inferior or abnormal. A lot of times within race equity work, folks will refer to white supremacy. That is a term that I've referred to. It's even in your pre-reading. It's not a term that I center anymore in my teaching space, particularly because what I have found over time is that folks who knowingly, subconsciously, or consciously identify with whiteness and white culture feel like white supremacy is separate from white culture, and it is not. White culture is rooted in the idea that white people and their ways of being, their appearance is normal, and everything else that is outside of that is abnormal or inferior. And none of us created that, but we all uphold it in different ways. And so part of our work today and moving forward is around identifying whiteness and white culture and deciding if that is something that you want to continue to uphold or not. And although America definitely is the leader in oppression in terms of race, it is not just a US problem. It's just that we are on US soil, so that is our focus. But this notion of whiteness and white culture and the way it oppresses all non-white people is happening on every single continent, and it has for thousands of years. There's a really great resource, a documentary called Exterminate All the Brutes. It's available through HBO, I believe, and it's by the same person who made I'm Not Your Negro, which is a documentary about James Baldwin's last book and the latter part of his life, Raoul Peck. What I appreciate about this documentary is it looks at the entire world and the impact of colonization and white culture on every part of the globe, and how that ended in what could be looked at as one of the greatest white on white atrocities, the Holocaust. So he basically says like the Holocaust was inevitable because for thousands of years, white people did this on every other continent. It was only inevitable that they brought it back to Europe, their original continent, to do it to themselves. Does that make sense to you? It's a great self-study tool. It's 4 parts. I would say watch it with someone else, not just by yourself, because it could be
Can you read
a lot of, it's heavy content.
Could you name it one more time? Exterminate?
Exterminate All the Brutes. Yeah. So also I want to say that sometimes when I say whiteness or white culture, people who are connected to whiteness or white culture or identify with it will feel as if I'm talking about them as an individual, and I am not. I'm talking about the culture of whiteness. And the reality that sometimes is missed or not discussed is that whiteness also has a dastardly impact on white people, because it makes a story about how you should live, how you should look, how you should engage the world. And that means not being your whole self. Back to our conversation about discomfort of like, that's part of whiteness and white culture, that you shouldn't make other people uncomfortable. You shouldn't talk about your feelings. That's something private. What's most important is your intellect and your ability to think and logicize your way out of every single thing. That's not a real way to live. And we'll talk about white culture some more later in our time together, but I want to make space in case anybody has any thoughts or questions around this term, whiteness or white culture.
I do. Can you hear? Sorry, I
definitely can.
Having a bit of problem with having my screen on and it keeps cutting out and buffering, so I'm behind a name.
Yes.
I was glad to hear you mention the Holocaust. I didn't quite hear the whole thing. I think first of all, I'm from England, and I don't think the issues are quite as defined here these days as they are in the States. because I certainly don't relate to this in quite perhaps the same way as maybe I should be. And I will also say I am Jewish. So when I was born just after the war and just after the Holocaust, I was the minority that was discriminated against. And so in a way, I've never really seen myself as white. So I just kind of wanted to bring this into the room, not to make me different or to make me anything other than interested in why does everything have to be so black and white? There's these shades of gray. I don't consider myself really to be white. And if I was to put on screen a picture of my dad, he is very obviously mixed race because there was the Black Jews, the Falasha Jews. So I'm kind of bouncing between, I'm certainly feeling uncomfortable, which is great. And noticing that my tendency when I'm uncomfortable is either to go into full Helen attack mode and become quite sarcastic or whatever, or to completely withdraw. So this is kind of why I wanted to put my voice in the room and just say where I'm at with everything right now, to feel more comfortable to be here as I am, and to respect all our differences, and not to assume that we are all either black or white, and come down on either side of a fence. So I hope this was taken in the spirit it was meant. So
I appreciate you making that in the room, Helen.
Sorry?
I appreciate you saying those things. I appreciate your voice in the space, because we're going to talk about in just a few moments. Good. Because of whiteness and white culture, there isn't a lot of nuance when we're talking about race, because also the impact isn't very nuanced. And so like, I can hold that there are folks in the room, right, who do not see themselves as white people. And also how you see yourself doesn't have as great an impact in greater society as how other people see you. And so we'll talk about that in a moment when we talk about privilege, but there is the nuance of knowing that even in Black community, there are people who are darker skinned, have more of what would be considered kinkier or textured hair, that are going to be treated differently than other Black people who have a lighter skin and what hair might be seen as like acceptable. The same is going to be true around age. So we're going to be talking about all of these different systems. The reason though that I start with race and why I rooted in race is because this is the one that is most pervasive and unavoidable under all circumstances. So like, I'm never going to walk in a room and someone make an assumption that I'm a white person. It's never going to happen. And that has impacted my entire life, as well as the lives of my children and the lives of my ancestors. And you also have had an experience that's very much rooted in your culture. And also like, even with our identities that have been harmed, undervalued, we each have levels of privilege that have a lot to do with the outside world and nothing to do with us. Right. And we'll talk about that in a second, but I want to just name that in the space of like, when I'm considering the work of advocacy, I'm considering whose identities are always, always, always going to be put at the bottom in a space. I actually don't really work that often in mixed spaces. I mostly work in all Black spaces. So when I'm in a space with all Black people, our Blackness is there. And then also there are folks who are Black in the space who are going to be undervalued because their skin is darker, or because they're in a bigger body, or because they have a visible disability or an invisible disability, neurodivergence, because of their age, because of their gender, because of their sexuality. Like these are all levels to our identity. So like in the document with the common understandings, one of the words in there is intersectionality, meaning this place where all of our identities meet. And so I appreciate your comment because it takes me to the next word that I want to talk about.
Before I go,
Privilege,
while we're on this subject, not everybody knows this, but I am actually neurodiverse as well, which kind of predisposes me to perhaps saying things that should be edited better.
No, I mean, what you shared was important to bring in the space. I mean, even in this documentary, what is highlighted that I feel most Americans do not recognize or realize is that before the Nazis began their campaign to actively exterminate Jewish people on the continent, they came to the US, to the American South, to witness how Jim Crow was being doled out against Black people. And then they said, y'all are doing something very arbitrary and harmful that is like way worse than what anything we would want to do. And so they took parts of what happens here in the US and did that in Europe. And I think people don't make that connection, that in the same way that people have idly sat by and let Black and brown people be murdered just for being Black and brown, the same Americans sat by and let what was happening here be executed across the ocean. And his documentary does a really great job of weaving together how that has impacts on the continent of Asia, the continent of Africa, across New Zealand, Australia, all through Europe and the Americas, North and South America. So I appreciate you naming it because it's not just Black and white. And also, this is the frame that we have to start from, because this is really where oppression begins, of them, I'm saying, white folks coming onto a continent of Black and brown people and saying, you're less than us. And we are going to not only destroy your continent, but we're going to steal your people away from this continent for generations. And here in the US, which is where I live, but also in Europe, like, this has ongoing and lasting ramifications that I don't actually like hold a space of blame when white folks are like, oh, I didn't know this. There's an active campaign for you not to know what it is you are agreeing to when you agree to whiteness, which should anger white people and make you want to disrupt it because you're being kept from your wholeness. In many ways, most people who live here in the US and in other westernized European countries, a lot of culture has been stripped out for you to be white. And you should want your culture back. You should want your language, your music, your food, your customs, your holidays back. But to be white in America and in the Western world means giving up a lot of those things. And we're going to talk about it. So I appreciate you naming it. And Prashanti, I appreciate you putting the link to the documentary down here in the chat for everybody. The next word that I want to talk about is racism. And so when I say racism, what comes up for you? And I'm going to share the definition that I'd like for us to hold.
Discrimination and labeling.
Thank you, Sonali.
Judging somebody as different and other than, just based on physical appearance or something arbitrary like that.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to share the definition with you all. Again, it's in that document that I shared as part of your pre-reading. So racism is racial prejudice plus social and institutional power. Racism is advantage based on race. Racism is oppression based on race. Racism is a foundation of white culture. And I want to make sure that we're clear that the definition of racism is racial prejudice plus social and institutional power. Sometimes, like recently, there's a person who used to be a leader of a nation who says that the attorney general is after him and it is reverse racism. This is not true, because even as the attorney general, she's still a Black woman working inside of a white system. She does not have social and institutional power against this other human. And I'm sharing that with you because when you go out to talk about racism with people in your community, people you love and trust, even for yourself, you might be holding a story as a white person or a white presenting person of saying like, well, I've experienced reverse racism. You have not, that is not a real thing. People of color do not have social and institutional power against you anywhere in the world. So you might have experienced prejudice. We all have prejudices as part of our socialization to view some people as more valuable than others. We can work on those prejudices, and it's imperative that white people and white presenting people really dig up racism inside themselves and how they interact and in the communities they're a part of, because it wields two wrongs. It wields prejudice, but it's connected to a power that really impacts people's actual ability to exist. And like an example that I give folks is in New York City, you all might remember this, there was a Black person, they were walking in the park, they're a birder. So they were walking in the park, looking at birds. They encountered a white person who had a dog. Their dog was not on a leash. There is a strict leash law here in New York City. They said to that person, your dog needs to be on a leash. What I later read is their dog was bothering them and they have a fear of dogs. So they approached this person like, can you leash your dog? Because I'm not comfortable with dogs and it's against the law. And this white person proceeded to start threatening the Black person and saying, well, I'll call the police. And what will happen if a white woman calls the police and says a Black man is threatening her in the park? And what was on display was her knowing and wielding her social and institutional power, because she knew that whiteness and white culture says that a white person is inherently trustworthy. They're inherently good, and this non-white person is not. So if they are called to determine who's in the right or who's in the wrong, she knew she had that power on her side just because of her appearance. Luckily for all of us, he recorded the whole thing. However, we can know that this incident that didn't end in a person losing their life could have. We don't know how that could have escalated. And this is the type of social and institutional power that is connected to whiteness and white culture that's wielded all the time. And I'm not here saying that you all are intentionally doing that. And also, if you're not intentional about uncovering it, it's living in you. It lives in me, even as a Black person. I have to root out and confront anti-Blackness that might be a part of me just from my socialization, even as a Black person. I have to root out and uproot any stories that are homophobic or transphobic, even as a queer person, because they are embedded in me, that something is not as good or right as something else. And all of us are navigating that. It's just part of the socialization that we have. Are there questions about racism or the definition? Yeah, go ahead, Sam.
Oh, I was unmuted already. Sorry. Thank you. I just wanted to ask about reverse racism, because I felt like, before that term was ever used, I used to use it on myself. I felt like a reverse racist because of basically seeing what you're talking about in the South, in Oklahoma, in my own family, abject racism. And I don't know why, but it elicited the opposite response in me, to where I started to really basically at the root of things feel like people of color were superior to white people. And to me, that's another form of racism, which it wasn't until I got to Hawaii and the indigenous people in Hawaii where my teacher there said, we don't need that inferiority complex either. That doesn't really help. So I think I asked you about this last time, but it's an appellation that I've applied to myself, and I just don't know. Yeah, thanks.
I mean, I don't like the term at all, but I'm not here to tell folks what term to use. For me, it is a derailment. People use it as a derail from being held accountable for how they are wielding whiteness. That's the only time I hear it. It's like, oh, well, y'all are being reverse racist to me. Or in my particular circumstance, I am part of a Black-led nonprofit based out of North Carolina. We have one focus, and it is healing justice for Black people, meaning access to all the things that Black people might need to be whole, including yoga, mindfulness, meditation, Ayurvedic trainings, these types of things. We do that in spaces where all of the facilitators are Black and only Black folks can participate. Choice we make. We're a private organization. at least once or twice a month, usually when we announce offerings, we get emails about how our work is reverse racism. And I always have the same response. We are not saying that you cannot meditate, go to Ayurvedic trainings, take restorative yoga. You can, there's billions of them available in online and in person. We're saying you can't come to this one because this one is for us and there are specific things we need to talk about in this space. But that's how I often hear it. And part of it too is that whiteness and white culture says that white people should be able to have access to anything they can afford to have access to. And for non-white people to say, here's a thing, and it doesn't matter how much money you could contribute, you cannot have access, they don't know what to do with that. It's like, wait a minute, this is not normal, right, or good. So I'm gonna put my foot down and send a terse email about reverse racism. And I'm offering that to y'all because if you decide to have conversations with people in your family, people in your street, people that you care about, people that you don't care about, there is going to be this need to prove that, well, I'm white and Black people have harmed me too. Or, well, I'm white and Asian people have said harmful things to me. And it's like, that might be true. And they don't have social and institutional power against you to rip your life apart, to murder you and get away with it. Like, that's what we're actually talking about. Like, racism can be really small, but the reason why Black people die and it's on video and we can watch it on the internet over and over again is because of racism. Because Black people are seen as inferior. So seeing them die on TV is like seeing an animal die on TV. Seeing anything die on TV should not be happening, but it's normal. And that's because of anti-Blackness. The reason why I had to pay a photographer to take pictures of Black people doing yoga so I could make flyers when I first was a teacher is because of racism. Black people have been doing yoga always, all along, even before India. We don't have to get into that. And also the reason why the roots of yoga stop at India and don't come to Africa is because of racism. People don't want to agree that they're doing something that was indigenous to people that they've subjugated and said were not full humans. They're not going to agree to that. And like all of that is racism. So I appreciate you adding it, Snehan. I think I would switch and just say that you were a person who was living in an environment that was misaligned from a truth that you knew. And so of course it would make you feel like, well, how could these people do this thing? The work that I also have to do is to radically love people who don't love or care for me either, or who don't want what's right in the world. I have to radically love all humans. It's a choice I'm making as part of my own practice that, I'll be honest, I do have boundaries and barriers around my interactions with white people. And it is because I've experienced what happens when those boundaries are not in place. But that's not from lack of human radical love. That is like the most radical love that I can show, is that like, I'm going to make this boundary or barrier around my time, around how I engage, and around what I'm teaching. Because if I don't, then I'm not going to be able to do it with a spirit of love. It is going to be very angry and tense, and that doesn't help either. So I also don't teach everybody. It's partially why I'm going to stop teaching this altogether. But we can talk about that later. Thank you. I can't see your name, but I see your hand up. You're on a Samsung.
Hi, this is Nisha. I am on my phone now. Anyway, I am a little confused between prejudice and racism, and I by no means want to deflect or take away from the topic that we're focusing on white and Black people, but it's always been my understanding that people in other countries are racist against other people of other colored skin as well. Like it's not just,
Yeah, so what I'll say is prejudice is this socialization that some folks are more valuable than others. And so prejudice can show up around many things besides race, like age. Ageism is a type of prejudice, a prejudice for younger people versus older folks, or prejudice against children in retrospect to adults. Like ageism goes both ways, but also prejudice can look like people who are in what are considered skinny, healthy, or normal bodies, meaning folks who are in smaller bodies, folks who don't need a wheelchair, who don't use a hearing aid. Like all of these are also prejudices, and they're part of our socialization. The racism occurs though when you have social and institutional power, and we're talking about race. But that's the same for like racism is just going to be specific around race, attaching it to social and institutional power. And there are other prejudices that social and institutional power can be connected to, like ableism, right? Most people make the assumption that everyone's bodies work the same way and need the same things to get in to a space. And if you don't, you're different. There's many different words that they've attached to it. This is a social and institutional power that's carried with it though, because most places in the world don't require things to be accessible for wheelchairs or canes or for folks without sight or folks who use hearing aids. That's a social and institutional power that's connected to it to make ableism a thing, the same as racism. Does that clarify for you a little bit?
It does. So for example,
Okay.
say I went to Chinatown and I wasn't served because of the color of my skin. That would be racism.
Mhm.
However,
It is
if I wasn't,
racism.
it is. However, if I wasn't served because I am a female or because I was wearing a skirt or for anything like that, that would be prejudice.
It could be, but it could be patriarchy, which is another system of oppression.
Or like
It
if I
could
was
be.
in a, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say it could be, but I guess for me, it's hard to talk about like what ifs more than like what actually occurs, right? And so we can hold that because of systems of oppression, anyone who doesn't fit a particular story of what makes a human valuable, and we can just name it. What makes a human valuable in our current system is if they are white, if they are male, if they are able-bodied, if they have a certain amount of education, and if they meet a socioeconomic standard of like, let's just say $150,000, $200,000 a year in income, then this person sits right in the circle of what this culture holds as most valuable. And they're 18 to 45 years old, and they're straight. But then this makes most of us not inside that little bitty circle. So we're all facing prejudice around it. But in a particular space, like if I'm a Black person and I go into another Black space and they say to me, I'm not going to serve you because you're queer, this isn't racism, this is homophobia. And that could show up in any space. Do they have the social and institutional power in that moment to harm me? Perhaps. But racism is a thing that it is so invasive that it impacts all of these other systems of oppression. Because anybody could face ableism, right? Any queer person could face homophobia. But when you level it up to racism and homophobia, this could actually like end a person's life. Versus just saying, I prefer not to socialize with a particular group. That's what a prejudice looks like. Or prejudice is making up a story about a group of people without actually knowing. But do you have the power to like cause harm to them? Then this is something different. It's just a prejudice. Something you should work on, something you should release, something that feeds these larger systems. But racism is like what I tell the people that I'm raising is like, it's a thing that we can't escape. And that feels very daunting. But unless you are living under it, you won't ever really hold the true weight of it, of having to consider like everything, how you're going to wear your hair, what color your nails are painted, what your name is, how other people are going to perceive your name, whether or not you're going to be the only in a space, whether or not you're going to be safe in that space, whether or not the police are going to be called on you for doing something that other people could easily do, like gather. And that's what makes racism so much different than prejudice. Prejudice is feeding it, but racism like next levels it, I guess, is a way to put it. I hope that answers your question, Nishla. Okay, one last word.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. One last word that I want to talk about, and that's privilege. So what comes up for you when we say privilege? And then I'll share the definition that I'd like us to hold.
people who have an advantage from just where they were situated or their birth without having meritoriously perhaps earned it in any way. That's my definition.
Yeah, thank you, Helen, for that.
For me, it's opportunity, whether earned or unearned.
Thank you. Are there others who'd like to share what comes up when we say privilege?
Entitlement.
Oh.
Yeah.
And freedom to choose.
Yeah, thank you for that. So the definition that I'll offer is privilege is a societal benefit bestowed upon people socially, politically, and economically. Privilege can be based on race, class, age, ability level, mental health status, gender identity, sexuality, and more. And again, that's on the document that I shared with you, so you have it, and I can resend it to when we're done today. I bring this into the space in kind of connection to what Helen was sharing about around the fact that the world isn't really just black and white. I mean, even within Blackness, there are shades and variations to being a Black person that grant more privilege in the greater society than others. And the most pressing example that I've been seeing lately is this lovely Black person who's now on the Supreme Court, Ketanji Brown Jackson, I think is her full name. And she's a Black person and a visibly Black person. And it was brought to my attention that there's an ongoing conversation about how she wears her hair, which might feel very benign to you, but the reality is that this is a person who has a style of hair that is, in my opinion, because I was a hairstylist for a long time, a sacred practice of honoring what your hair naturally does. And because her hair is not straightened or coiffed in a way that matches what white culture seems is necessary, it's like a whole conversation. And I'm like, this person has gone all the way through the schools, gotten all the degrees for their career path, and is ultimately sitting at the top tier, if we want to make a tier, around the career path that she has chosen. And y'all are having a conversation about her hair. And at the same time, we have another visible person of color who does identify with Blackness, who's sitting as the vice president. And she wears her hair the way that she wants to wear her hair, but it is much closer to what white folks consider normal. And there's ultimately no conversation about her hair at all. And even though these are two visibly not white people, this is what privilege looks like in a people of color community, right? That being said, when I'm talking about privilege, when we're about to talk about privilege, I am not making an analysis about whether or not you've experienced harm, trauma, or hardship in your life. The reality is that we live in a society, regardless of what country you're in, that promotes everyone having a hard time. It is not designed for anyone to actually succeed on a grand scale. So I'm not surprised if you had a hard life, if you experienced trauma, if you were abandoned, if you were harmed, if you had to go without, if you struggled to have food or housing. That is a common human experience, unfortunately, that our systems uphold. What I am saying, though, is it might not have been as hard as it could have been because you are white, or because you have access to money, or because you are cisgendered, or because you are straight, or because you are temporarily able-bodied, or because your parents had money and connection. That made it less hard than it could have been. And there is also benefits that you've had that other people haven't. I'll just share, for myself, I was born in 1980. Both of my parents were born in 1953. My grandparents were born in the early 1900s. My great-grandparents were born in the late 1800s. One of them being born before the end of enslavement. She was not enslaved, but she was still born before the end of enslavement. I met this person's daughter, my great-great-grandmother's daughter. She was alive when I was alive. So I've shared space with someone raised by someone before the end of enslavement. Often when we talk about enslavement in the US and its ongoing ramifications, the dominant culture narrative is this happened such a long time ago. This has no real impact on right now. And it's simply not true. It's simply the opposite of the truth. This happened less than 7 generations ago for most people living in the United States, regardless of your identity, whether you identify as a white person, a Black person, or something else. This was less than 7 generations ago. In fact, I was just looking up the last president we had before this president, and his grandfather was born before the end of enslavement. So we had someone who was a president whose grandfather, who was alive in their lifetime, was alive before the end of enslavement and benefited from enslavement through the Industrial Revolution, but that's a whole nother conversation. So I just want to say, like, when we're talking about privilege and like skin color, it can feel tender to say like, well, I'm a person who maybe is visibly white or identifies as white, and I had a hard life because of X, Y, and Z, and I'm compassionate around that. I'm not minimizing it. I'm saying that like, you and your people could get mortgages before 1973, which is the first year that Black people could get mortgages. This wasn't a long time ago. And that years, generations of having the access to buy property, allow it to acquire equity and pass that equity happened for generations and generations and generations before another group was even allowed to participate. So if you own a home, yes, you probably worked hard, you might have saved, you might have had to come up with the down payment on your own. And also there's a legacy of you having access that other people have had to fight against. I think when I sent the stuff, there might have been a list of racist laws that existed in the US. A lot of them, if you haven't had a chance to look, a lot of them are not old laws. The laws preventing Asian folks from becoming American citizens, this is the 70s. Many of us were born already. And these things impact people's ability to exist and to access things like food. It's like sometimes in yoga and wellness communities, we'll talk about like being plant-based or being vegan. I am a plant-based eater. I do believe in plant-based eating. And also the reality that I know through study is that Black people have never had control over their food source since they were stolen from the continent of Africa. So it's very complex to say to a group of people, you just need to be vegan when they have not and do not have control over their food sources. But this is not unique to Black people. However, like 97% of the people who grow food in this country are white farmers. 97% of the people who own food growing space in this country are white. And so there's an extreme privilege that white people usually have closer proximity to food, closer availability to food, and people are more likely to help you when you don't have food. And that's not something that you earned. It's just a benefit of society that's passed down because of your identity. But the same could be true for any identity. It's like, I'm not a straight person. There's tons of assumptions made about who people are partnered to that come up in very benign ways, but like it's because of privilege. There's an assumption that everyone's straight, and if you're not straight, you'll let people know. And it's like, this is a privilege that you have, that people are gonna automatically honor the relationships that you're in, accept the relationships you're in, that your loved ones will have access to you if you're sick or dying. These are types of privilege that I'm talking about, right? So I wanna make space in case there's any questions about privilege, things you wanna add or say. And then we're gonna take just like a 3-minute break. And we're gonna come back and do a writing exercise before we wrap up.
I'm not sure whether this is relevant particularly, but I think there's also an issue for me around people who sometimes look like they come from a really privileged background, and yet they have inner issues that they certainly didn't feel privileged. I'm wondering if we could kind of acknowledge that a bit, or again, is that something taking us off the track?
It's not taking us off the track. I think it's an invitation for people to really first understand, and this is part of what is hard, right? Our popular education model, so public schools, private schools, parochial schools are not necessarily in place to educate the populations that are passing through them. They're in place to create workers for the countries where the people live. And there is an ongoing and ever-present story of erasing what has happened so that people in power don't have to be held accountable for that. But what's lost in that is that people don't know the history. They don't know how a thing became a thing and how it became normalized. And particularly in the US, the way that history is taught is very like segmented and choppy. You had the pilgrims that came, you had enslavement for a little bit, and then everyone was free. And then you had Martin Luther King and then Barack Obama. And it's like, those things did happen. And so much is left out, including the fact that, like, if we're talking about the US, this was a fully populated continent with people, nations, ways of being, and culture. And another group decided that they wanted it. And so they came over here maliciously to take it. There was never a good intent. It was always to take a thing that did not belong to them. And the documentary is a good tool around this. The people who received them, whether it was in India or Africa, Asia, America, assumed good intent. They had no context for the type of oppression that was about to occur. And so they were welcoming. And the people in power took advantage of this. And that still continues to this day. There's this notion that, you know, Europeans, for instance, came here to the US and they just wanted to like be in perfect and right relationship with the indigenous people and nations that were here. And that's not true. There were plans from the beginning to come here, disrupt, steal, take, and kill whoever needed to be killed to take hold of this land. And we don't teach that to our children because we don't want them to feel ashamed about what has happened before. And so when we start to talk about privilege, back to our conversation around discomfort, people do not have the capacity to hear your very existence has meant the non-existence of other people and other culture. They take it as a personal attack, when really it's just an invitation to learn more about how you got to this point, how you arrived here, because it's not, none of the oppression that we see, as much as it would be medicine for me to think like, oh, this was an unforeseen consequence. No, no, no. These were the consequences that they were willing to dole out in the quest for power, in the quest to take. And so even when we see someone who may or may not have had a privileged life, but appears to have a privileged life, each of us is experiencing different kinds of privilege all the time. We're moving in and out from this access of power based on our identities, but also based on time, based on proximity to other people who are outside of that circle. And it is most important work for us to accept that and discover what kind of privilege that we're holding, because it's not a point of shame, actually. It is a point and access for power and shifting culture. So I'll give y'all an example. I am a Black person. I was raised by 2 Black people. My family is a Black family. My family entered the US through enslavement. In one instance, I have a lot of records about my family, which is very uncommon. So I already hold that as an extreme privilege that I can say, these are my relatives and they came from these places and this is how they traveled through enslavement in the US, because mostly there are no records for that. But also I can know that 60 years before enslavement ended, on my mother's side of the family and my father's side of the family, my relatives were free. And I celebrate that for them But also, this meant that they started acquiring resources that they could hold as their own 60 years before other Black people who lived here. And so when I say like, oh, I own a home, I do own a home, and I worked really hard. I'm working right now with y'all to pay the mortgage for that home. And my parents own the home that I grew up in. So there's shared and past equity that made it possible for me to buy that house. But also both of my parents grew up in homes that their parents owned. And fortunately, on my side, in my family, my grandparents grew up in the houses that their parents owned, which is almost like, what, in the early 1900s, the late 1800s, these people already owned land. So when I go into a Black space and I'm talking about how we support and stand in solidarity with other Black people who are houseless or facing eviction or facing rising costs of housing, I can't walk in that space and say like, all y'all need to do is like save and get a good realtor and like do these other things, because that's not all they have to do. There's a lot to overcome. And I have the privilege not only of shared and past equity, but of shared and past knowledge and information about how the process works. And so I didn't struggle through the process because I could turn to my parents and say, what do I do next? What's the best option? And that's a privilege. And knowing that helps me to be in spaces and build with people in a way that I don't bring my privilege in and oppress others. And so I'm saying that to y'all to say, in the next 20 minutes, we're gonna start an exercise that I want you to continue until we're together next month of listing out the privilege that you have. And I wanna invite that when shame or discomfort arises, I wanna invite you to remember that this is an access of power that you have. It's like, Swami Ramananda, you've been a part of integral yoga for a long time. And I'm using you as an example because I know that you went through my other course. You have the privilege of having a community who trusts and listens to you. And this isn't a point of shame, but it's a point of saying, and this is exactly what Ramananda did, I'm taking a course on racial equity, and I have a community who trusts me. I'm going to use the privilege I have as a leader in that community to bring this work to these people. But if Ramananda wasn't able to say like, oh, I have the privilege of being a leader of a community with people who listen to me, if they were uncomfortable with holding that, then they could have done nothing. They could have took the course and never said anything to y'all about it at all. But they use this knowledge of their own privilege to be in service of the greater work that we want to do. And that's all I'm asking you to do, is look at the ways that you have access to resources and power through privilege to shift culture. The reality is there are white people who are never going to listen to me have a conversation about it just because I am a Black person, but also perhaps because of the language that I'm going to use. And some of these people are going to listen to you. So it's good for you to know, well, I'm a white person and my identity is seen as normal and standard, or I'm a person who looks white. And so people are going to treat me like I'm a white person. I'm going to use that power to be disruptive to the very thing that I'm supposed to be benefiting from.
So privilege can be used as another means of oppression, and it can be used as another means of freeing up.
Yeah.
And coming in between. So that's interesting because words are pejorative, you know, and it's like immediately you hear the word privilege, it's you're there and someone else is there. But actually, if we balance that privilege out, this is why I think this is an interesting training, because I think particularly with integral yoga, because it's yantra, our yantra shows every religious symbol, it accepts everybody into the ashram, whether they are black, white, green, or pink with purple spots, as my mother, bless her, used to say.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it's we're being called upon here in a way to be more in integrity with what we are purporting to be teachers of. This is,
and I mean, the reality is, I have a very positive view of integral yoga, and I know people who've been really harmed in this space because of the identities that they hold. And not because the people in integral yoga are bad or the organization is bad, but because we are all humans navigating a system that asks us to hoard, enclose, divide, put people on pedestals, knock other people down, value some, not value others. And as much as we might come to the ashram, live at the ashram, meditate, teach, practice, that socialization was in you before you ever got there. And if there's not an intentional work around what am I bringing, you're just going to replicate it in the space. And that's true for any identity. There's not a singular community who has the best practices around how not to be in systems of oppression. They show up everywhere. It's just a matter of, do y'all have the capacity to have an honest conversation that like, yeah, we invite and welcome everyone, but our bathrooms are still gendered. So you don't actually invite and welcome everyone, because folks who don't live in a gender binary are made to be smaller in the space because they got to choose which bathroom to go in. And that might seem like not something to worry about, but that's your privilege on display. And so it's this space of saying like, okay, like for myself, I am a cisgendered person. And so I live under the gender that was assigned to me when I was born. That could change. I don't know. At this point, that's where I am. I have a responsibility though, when I get pulled into an all women space, particularly an all Black women space, to question, why are there no Black trans women here? Those are women and they are Black. Why weren't they invited? Why are they not being honored? Not because it benefits me, but because I'm in solidarity with them and I'm using my privilege as a trusted person in that space to question and advocate. And that's all I'm saying for y'all too. It's like, when you are clear on the privilege you have, you can wield that thing to advocate. You can wield that thing to say like, why are there no people over 45 as a part of this group? Why are there no people under 18? Why are there no X, Y, or Z people being invited into this conversation, being honored, being talked about, being taught? Like, that's what your privilege affords you, along with whatever societal benefit, right? A last example I'll give y'all is when this last person became the president in the city where I lived in Charlotte, like many cities, there was a protest where people wore pink knitted hats and they like marched. And I was asked to lead a meditation, like an opening meditation at the one in Charlotte. And I turned it down. And people were like, why would you turn that down? This is a great time for all women to unite and be together. And I'm like, well, first, I was the only Black person that they asked to be a part of the program. Second, there were no trans women asked to be a part of the program. And thirdly, all of these women who are so activated now have been completely silent while Black children have been murdered. And as a parent to Black children, I'm not in solidarity with y'all because y'all are not in solidarity with me. It wouldn't have mattered who got elected. Y'all are mad right now because the person you wanted to be elected wasn't elected and you want to do something about it. But the real reality is, even if he hadn't been elected, the harm that happens to non-white, non-straight, non-cis people would have continued under that other president also. And so like, I'll come to a march where we're going to talk about all of those things, but not one that just centers your anger and frustration about this singular event. Does that make sense to y'all? And that was a privilege I had to say like, I'm not going to, and I'm gonna make a public statement about why I'm not a part of it and tag y'all in it, since we're all following each other. But that was me using my privilege. Y'all trust me and want me to be a part of your thing. Now I'm going to tell you why your thing is problematic. And that's the opportunity you all have. And you don't have to do it in that way. You could be more loving for the people you love and care about. I didn't know these people that much.
I think a lot of people try and make privileged people feel guilty, and I put myself in every category. So,
well,
that's
what I would say is, what I would say about that around like guilt and shame is what I said in the beginning. White culture has a list of emotions that people, particularly people closer to power, shouldn't have to feel. Shouldn't have to feel guilty. You shouldn't have to feel ashamed. And what I would say is guilt and shame are natural parts of humanness. Mm-hmm. Because we have a central truth, whether we are clear on it or not, we have a central truth. And anytime our behavior, our words, our way of living is not in alignment with that, and other people know it, shame is activated. And shame can be very disabling. But similarly to discomfort, I would invite that guilt and shame are only data about misalignment. I actually look at feeling guilt and shame as a gift because it's an opportunity for me to change. Because it's like, if I felt good about it, if it felt true to me, I wouldn't be ashamed no matter what you say. But there's some story I'm holding that says things shouldn't be this way. And now I have the opportunity to change how they are. When I first came out, I had to navigate an immense amount of shame. One, for pretending to be someone that I was not. Great data. I will never do that again. I spent 37 years doing it. I will never do that again. But also, I'll never ask another person to do that because I know what it was like. And that shame is only an indicator that I knew it wasn't right for me to pretend to be somebody else. I was just navigating a bigger system. I was navigating caring about what other people think. And so I use shame and guilt around all the times that I could have just said, you're not the only queer person in the room, or I'm not a straight person, stop calling me that. I have a lot of guilt and shame around that I still have to navigate. I use it as data to know I'm not going to hide who I am in any space. I'm always going to advocate for everybody along this LGBTQ spectrum, because even though I thought I was a good ally, I was being a terrible ally because I was lying about who I was.
Well, I feel a little guilty for taking up a lot of time.
No,
I'm not going to be able to. I'm not going to be able to come to any of the other live sessions. So this is my only chance to actually engage in some questions and dialogue, because I'm going to have to rely on the recordings. So
yeah. No, I mean, I appreciate it. I always have a schedule and my schedule always moves. It's already changed twice since we've been in here. I want to give a couple of things because we're in our last few minutes and I feel myself coming to my capacity around talking. I'm navigating allergies. Here's my email address. That's my direct email address. I check my emails on Tuesdays. And I make a priority around what is time sensitive. So if you email me and you don't hear from me immediately, don't be disheartened or think I don't care. If it's really important and you need an answer, just say, Kelly, I'm bumping this back up to the top of your email. But feel free to email me and reach out if you have questions about today's session or anything moving forward. I also want to give a homework assignment because I don't want to rush through this particular activity. But in your readings, I sent a link to an article. The article was written in 1989, and it's by a white woman named Peggy McIntosh. And it talks about privilege. It's called Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack. My request is, if you have not already, and even if you have, to go and read that document and then start to cultivate for yourself a list of privileges that are inherent to your existence that you didn't exactly earn. And if you're like, well, I don't know, access to clean water. You got clean water, you didn't earn that, because there's other people in the US working just as hard or not harder than us, and they don't have clean water. Mississippi, Michigan, North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, like Puerto Rico, there's so many places where they don't have clean water. And this is not something that you earned. You have access because of where you live, and most likely because of the identity that you hold, or the identity most people around you hold. So even as a Black person, I know the reason why I have clean water, cleanish water, is because I live in New York City, and that's a priority. This is seen as an important place, whereas people living in Jackson, Mississippi in this moment do not have clean water. They've not had clean water for 60 plus days. No one is in a rush to even solve that problem. And it's because they're in the American South, in a very rural place. People don't actually care what happens in that community, and more than half of the residents are not white people. So I want you to read that document, make a list of privileges. I want you to be reminding yourself that making this list is not a shame list or a list about how bad you should feel. This is ways for you to understand the access you have to shifting culture. That's it. Okay. Are there questions? And you know, there's this space of, I want you to stick with this assignment until we're together next time, because some things you might not be able to see. It's like, you know, when you go in the grocery store, if you shop in a grocery store and people, you come to like the register and they're like, hey, how are you today? You know, like they have to like make banter with you. I always say the same thing. I'm like, well, any day that I can walk into the store and buy the food that I need in the capitalist system is a good day. And sometimes people are like, yeah, because things are so busy and blah, blah. And I'm like, no, did you hear what I said? We're in a system that is designed for most people to not have access to food. And I just walked into the store. I didn't have to make choices about necessities. I got things that I wanted and needed with ease. I'm swiping my debit card. I don't have to worry about whether or not this transaction will be declined. I feel so blessed. And then the person will be like, oh, I hadn't thought about it like that. And I'm like, yeah, those of us with access to food, that's a privilege. We haven't all earned it. That's a privilege. We have a responsibility and a responsibility and an opportunity to advocate, because most people, just even here where we live, don't have secure access to food. If you do, it's a privilege. I'm not saying you didn't work hard, but I know why I have access to food. It is because I work, but it's also because my parents worked and they went to college and they have college degrees. So they made a certain amount of money and they both grew up on farms. So they've always had access to food. So they prioritize that over many other things. Not everybody has that same experience. I didn't cultivate that for myself. So I hold it as a privilege. Does that make sense to y'all? So it's like noticing just as you're going, like you got to walk up and down the steps at the ashram, privilege. Because not everybody can navigate that. And I just want you to be making a list for yourself, because it's going to help us later when we think about, like, what do I, Snehan, do? Or what do I, Marilyn, do? Or what do I, Mukti Devi, do? Like, it's going to be different because we're all holding different things. We all have different identities. And this beginning work of understanding the power connected to some of the identities you hold is essential. Because later, you're going to try to put yourself in spaces where you are going to exercise privilege and cause more harm, and B, miss out on opportunities to actually do something sustainable. Y'all worked hard today. Yes, Ramananda, sorry.
Kelly, you made reference a few times to resources that you sent us before. I hate to ask you to send it again, but would you, if you would
send it again.
I'll make sure it gets to everybody.
What I'm going to say is I am at my capacity to be in front of the computer. So I'm going to send it when I start my work week on Tuesday. I'll email it to you.
Okay.
And then y'all will have it in plenty of time for our next like session.
And this last reading assignment you gave us, unpacking the invisible backpack, that's in those resources.
It is, and I'll send it with the I'll send it when I send the other stuff on Tuesday. But you can also just like Google it; it'll come up. The person's name is Taki McIntosh.
It's listed on the chat. I think Keiko.
Oh yes,
yeah.
Keiko, thank you so much. Yes, thank you. I didn't even see that. Thank you all.
And if
I'm
you
super
save,
grateful.
Oh, I was going to say, if you want to save the chat, there are 3 dots at the bottom on the right-hand side. If you click it, you have a choice, save the chat, and it will come in, in a folder. Yeah.
I didn't even know that. So thank you for teaching me on Zoom on today. I am grateful. The 3 dots, save the chat. There's so many times I'm over here like furiously writing because I didn't know I could save the chat. Thank you.
Groundbreaking, Susan. Thank you. I've just done it.
I'm going to say goodbye to y'all. I want you to take really good care of yourselves. If you are feeling like, ooh, great. That's exactly how it normally lands. Not great. I don't want you to be feeling, ooh. I want to say like, that's what happens when we start to think about this thing that is not us, but is living in us. And so just like be gentle with yourselves. Don't feel like you have to do something about what we've talked about. Just like take your time, let it land. Remind yourself like this feels unusual, hard, uncomfortable because I am learning. That's it. It's not a symbol of your goodness, your ability, what's going to come of it. It's none of those things. It's like when you start a renovation. I don't know if y'all have ever started a renovation. I renovated a house one time. And it's like, you got to rip everything out. And it's a disaster. It's uninhabitable before you can start to like put the things back. And that's all we're doing right now. We're taking out old cabinets, pulling down wallpaper, pulling up floors that are not in use anymore. We're just ripping those things up. And as we work through this time together, we'll put everything back in place. But this time it'll be what you actually want it to be, a more equitable, liberated way of living. Okay?
Great. Thanks so much, Kelly, on behalf of all
Thank
of us.
you all. Yes. Peace.